I'm Humberto Schwab, and that's Miguel, my partner and everything, Miguel Harpers, and we are we have developed the Socratic Design Academy. It's a methodology based on Socratic design, which I'm not going to explain because that takes an hour, but I'm going to say something about it. I'm originally a physicist and a philosopher, and basically they have one thing very strong in common, that is that you want to look for the simple things in it. You want to see for what is not variable in everything. So we see a multitude of stuff, but what is then underneath the forces? And in the Socratic design methodology, which I developed by working with companies, schools, students, public bodies, and private persons. So we transform, in a sort of technology way, persons from a normal individual to a thinking individual. That is my business. And we can also transform a business from a non-thinking business in a thinking business. And we can transform groups from non-thinking into thinking. And it always works. So I never have a failure all past 20 years. And why not? Because people cannot think, so it's easy to get them to think. You see what I mean? So people are thinking they are thinking, but basically they are not. And it has to do with some building blocks of our culture. It has to do with some strong assumptions, philosophical assumptions, that are in your system without knowing, but they are basically designing your internal and your external. You call it myself. But basically there's very few yourself. But that's the first error, of course, that a lot of people make. They say, I, and I want to be original, but it's impossible because the language you didn't invent. So, if you want to be I, then start your own language and do things on your own. Start your own rituals, everything. Make your own body, and then you can say I. So that's a very strong mistake. But we have this mistake due to another one, which is that we think we have brains and bodies. So most of you would say, I have a body, or not. Or would you say, I am a body? I have, you would say.
No, I am.
I am. Who would say I have a body normally?
Yeah.
That's the majority.
That's a majority.
That's normal.
Yeah.
So he's very special. But that's a good sign. So there are always people already. But I have a body is one of the most simple proofs of us incorporating wrong assumptions. Because it supposes that you have separate body and mind. And this was done in the 16th century by Descartes, who didn't know much about neuroscience or whatever science. But he came to this conclusion by thinking. And it's the famous thought, cogito ergo sum. Basically, you are all viruses in you which are cogito ergo sum. And my task is to get you out of that virus to get a better self-awareness. But it is so stubborn, this virus, because it's pushed in you not only by language, also by education, also by your relations with people, also by your buildings, language, art, and so on and so on. So this is very interesting. How can we have 400 years such a stupid model? That's the question.
How do you define self?
First, we're not going to now ask questions. After me, we're going to do the questions, okay? Because that's the point, to make a sequence in reasonings. That's what I want to try. But a self, what is a self, is the key question, of course. And if you want to know a short answer, because I don't want to disappoint you, a self is not in your body. So a self is in between you and me at this moment. But when you're going to go with your mother, then you have another self. You know that. Because you listen to your mother and you know, she's talking with that person. Now she's talking with... So we don't have a self in our skull. The self is at the skin in between. So here we have a first track that artificial intelligence has nothing to do with us. You see what I mean? So that's what our talk is going about. But my question was, how can we be so stupid for 100 years? Anybody has an answer to that? How can we have thinking that we have a brain and a body? A body is a machine, and the brain is steering the machine. That's what kids learn. That's what education learns you. But the problem is, for 300 years of philosophy, if we have separated body and mind, how can then they communicate? That's a big problem. So we have the ghost in the machine question. If you have a ghost in you, and it pulls the button of the machine to raise your arm, the ghost will go through the bottom, because the bottom is material, and the ghost is immaterial. That's your assumption. So it doesn't work. The ghost in the machine doesn't work. Still, we do that. So we say, I have a mind, I have a brain. In my brain is myself. That's what we think. So if you talk to people, if they want to have very confidential, they think, deep in my brain is my real ik, my real I. This is an assumption which is so strong that people go taking 2 hours to drive to Groningen because only there is somebody who can connect with their I. Because the I is very unique. In our brain, we have the idea that we are thinking. But I have to disappoint you, and you can have it because you're very young, so you can have a lot of disruptions. You are not thinking mostly of the time. You have most of the time viral thoughts. And the thought is the pastime of thinking. Think, thought. So you have maybe thought it once, or your teacher has thought it for you, or your father has thought it for you, but it will be in your brain. No, not in your brain. It will be in your billion-wide neurosystem. And what is a thought? A thought is not a mental stuff, what we always have been teaching. A thought is just a physical circuit, electric circuit, connecting sensors, part of the brain, maybe a word, maybe some muscles, maybe some stomach stuff. That closes in a circuit, and this electrical circuit will give you, and this is the whole secret of this 400 years of stupidity, or ignorance, I have to say it mildly, this 400 years of ignorance, because this closed circuit, when it closes, gives you some very nice endorphin. So when you want to think, you mostly have thoughts, and the thoughts will repeat themselves, because if you repeat them, they give you every time an extra doses endorphin. So basically, they have a strategy, say to you, think me. And when you think them, they give you as a reward some dopamine, in the worst case, in the best case, some serotonin, mostly dopamine.
As a reward for the same thought.
Exactly, you got it.
Repeating the same thought.
Repeating gives you this reward.
There's a positive feedback loop.
What?
It's a positive feedback loop.
Yeah, but the word positive is here dangerous because it can also be a negative thought. So if you think,
It's
repeating,
announcing.
yeah. If you think, because the teacher told you you're a very stupid kid from a stupid neighborhood, and the teacher said it in a moment of aggression, it comes into the kid and it will stay there as a huge explosive bomb. This thought will also be addictive, which is a wonderful insight why we are so addicted to bad stuff. Because our body system doesn't recognize, is this a good thought or a bad thought for you? It only says, you make it close, the endorphin. Do it again, endorphin. So this is a discovery of David Bohm, and now, it was discovered in 1960, 70, now confirmed by neuroscience. So, this drama, what we are living in, is a a very nice drama because we get drugs. So that's the explanation why it's so difficult to get rid of it. It used to be, old philosophers knew this also. They said, don't do that because you get addicted to that. Refrain from doing that. If you do it once, then your machine will explode. And I want to rehearse this. But this is such a heavy insight that this is already for you a moment to transform yourself, because when you go home, the rest of your life you can watch your thoughts and you can think of your thoughts, and then you can ask yourself, do I want to think this? And that you get already to the next floor. So this is a very simple therapy you can put on yourself. But it's not easy because you have to stop your drugs. Because you want to say again, Amsterdam are assholes. You want to say it again. Or you want to say again, gypsy are stealing, or black people, etc., etc. Americans are aggressive, gives me a lot of endorphin. But also, this is the very interesting point, very abstract thoughts. You have very intelligent people who say, yes, but I can think. Well, I know a lot of intelligent people because I've studied physics and philosophy. And when Professor X came, or Engineer I, or whatever, I knew what he's going to say. On any question, he would say, I always say that you have to look, there we go for the addiction. You see? So very smart people have very smart addictive thoughts. And then it seems very impressive, so it's for harder to them to get rid of it, because everybody says, wow, that's a smart person. But it is not. To make things worse, the same is for feelings. So feelings, people use this concept to say, this is really true. I feel this. Yes or no? People use this. Feelings have the same neural structure as thoughts, so it's not different. Your body doesn't know, is this a feeling or a thought? It's the same structure. So when you have this feeling of, this guy is going to steal, you feel it, it's just a rehearsal of one thing you have felt 20 years ago. So it is so beautiful to know that we are addictive persons, because the road then is easy. Get rid of your addiction and start thinking and start feeling. And that's easy said, of course. That's why we have this huge, beautiful place in Spain, and when people come there, we get them out of their addiction in 4 days. Sometimes 3 days, some people more, but in 4 days we can get you into a thinking mode. By Socratic dialogue and by Socratic thinking. And how can you do it yourself? Well, just I told you this, but a very simple exercise is also watch the tree for 1 hour and look if you can watch the tree without thinking. If you can look at it without knowing what it is, a tree, you will get all your problems of your life on the table. Yeah, fuck, I cannot, that's coming in, and then that and that problem and that feeling, and I get sick. There's one businesswoman from Turkey who fainted in front of the tree because she realized how terrible assumption the Turkish women have. And they have to be like this, have to be beautiful, etc., etc. So this is the first exercise we always do. Try to watch the tree. It is very cold now, but you can also go to a botanical, a little warm, and then observe what is happening. Why is this important? Because we live in a society now where the addiction has been exponential. Why? It's very easy. If you talk about human rights, I would say that that's why one of my goals of working is to get people free out of this enslavement. We are enslaved in ourselves. We are hacked by our own stupid thoughts and felts. And above that, the whole, you can say, we call that the consumer food industry has hacked you on sugar. Sugar is giving you a very strong dopamine impulse. So strong that you will only want more sugar. So the cost of sugar is in America is like 3 trillion. The sickness caused by sugar consumption, 3 trillion. The profit by the sugar industry is 2 trillion. And this has been started somewhere between 1970 and 1980. If you look at any fast food, any food you go in Albert Heijn or whatever, it's 80% is sugar. So it's a beautiful way to get people not only hacked by their thoughts and their felt, but also hacked by the consumer industry, the bad consumer industry. And you can say that Robert Lustig wrote a book against all the powers of industry, and it's called The Hacking of the American Mind. And we see, he explains how our nervous system, dopamine, serotonin, is hacked by first sugar, then of course pornography, then of course by Facebook, social media, etc., etc., etc. I work for the Ministry of Education, and I go to schools to evaluate excellent schools in the Netherlands. And there was one shocking day when one normal Dutch guy in front of me said to me, Humberto, can I say something serious? Yes. He said, I want to commit suicide. And it appeared to be what is happening now epidemically. Young adolescents fall in deep depressions, fall in suicide attempts because of strong addictions to Instagram and Facebook. So they get a sort of identity profile from the outside. Well, this is all, you could say that this whole addictive industry is connected to our own addictive way of being. So what is now happening with artificial intelligence and robots? Well, robots means, everybody knows it, robot is invented in Czechoslovakia, and the meaning of robot means dutiful labor, compulsory labor. That's a robot. That's the origin of the word. And it was coined in 1922. You can say, if you look at this addictive talk I gave you, and you have to accept that for the moment, but it will be proven in the book of The Hacking of the American Mind, how this works. You could say that we are slaves of algorithms, always been. It's not new. Okay? So, when you say, yeah, the world is going into algorithms, it has always been that way. And Marx tried to stop it, Freud tried to stop it, Enlightenment philosophy, the Frankfurter Schule, and Plato warned us before the whole game. He said, don't do this because you get addicted. And why is that so terrible? Because addiction can be nice. You can say, well, I have my beer, I have my drugs, I have my sex, I have my everything. It could be nice. The point is that Plato would call that the life of a pig. And now, nothing wrong with pigs. There's a lot of bad treatment of pigs, but to be a pig while you are a human is a different piece of cake, of course. So what is then the life of a human? That's the question we are facing. If we have in the European context, we have a deep crisis of social democrats. You know why? Because they all forgot the whole project of humanization. They all said, Wim Kok, the first one, we have to stop ideology about humans. So we are okay. When you say we are okay, it means our enslaved, addictive relation with one another and the economy is okay, which is not, of course. If we look at artificial intelligence, it's very easy. We have made ourselves very easy to be copied. So artificial intelligence is the next step of a process of enveloping us. Enveloping means you make you so simple that you can be replaced by a machine. A very simple example is you can buy something to mow your lawn, but it must be quadratic, square-wise. So what people do now, they all have gardens square-wise, otherwise you cannot buy the robot. That's what we do with ourselves. But we've done it not the last 50 years, we've done it the last 300 years. Basically, we've done it starting when we started writing. Because writing was already a sort of new medium, like we have now internet. And the new medium we didn't actually understand well. And Plato was at the moment where the new medium started. It's like where we are now with this new medium. We didn't understand it. So Socrates is the one who said, don't write stuff up. Keep on talking.
Yeah, and remembering things.
And remembering things, yes. Because that's really human. Don't become a pig. Because writing is very dangerous. Well, if we look, I will come back to Plato, but first I want to have something about dopamine and serotonin. Anybody knows the difference between the two? So that's well, then I'm going to tell you, because it's very important, because it's us. It's in us. Where is dopamine in your body? Your dopamine is basically, where did you point it? No, it's here, this part of the brain, the stem. So the old brain, the reptile brain. So if I cut off your nail I put silence this, you still have the midbrain. The midbrain uses 4 receptors for dopamine. Receptors mean where the dopamine comes in. And the dopamine circulates in your blood, whatever, but it provokes and is organized by deep instincts like sexual lust, fear, aggression. So if you have to kill the tiger, you need a lot of dopamine. If you have to make a mate and make children, you need a lot of dopamine. And it will come, so it's very nice. But you can understand it's very strong. So the dopamine is basically the strongest one in you. That's why, what is the most, the biggest activity in the internet? Pornography. It's the pornography is the brain, the stem, the brain stem is active. And we cannot get rid of it. Why? The essence of dopamine is that you always want more. It's that simple. So you can distinguish dopamine from serotonin after this talk, and then you can choose yourself, do I want to become a dopamine pig, or or stay a dopamine pig, or do I want to become a serotonin Plato lover?
First you have to explain what serotonin is.
I'm going to explain that, but I have to give slow because it had to go into the neocortex. But the dopamine always is very strong in wanting more. So if you have Tinder on your iPhone, of course you want to have sexual intercourse, but it's so interesting. There's a part in your brain that only wants you to seek. So that was the animal, get out of the cave. Get out of the cave, then you get also dopamine. So a lot of people don't understand why they swipe on Tinder, then go to somebody and then already want to go to the next. Because they are addicted to seeking. That's why kids on Instagram, if you watch what they do, they just go on. And that every pulse gives you every time a dosage of dopamine. The point with dopamine is that it is not connected to your neocortex. It is mostly connected to stuff outside you, bodies, sugar, cars, it's always a stuff, or cigarettes, it's a very strong one. Dopamine is always the stuff outside you, it's always very strong short term, and it always wants more. So if you have taken one cigarette, I used to smoke and I've stopped it, because it was so, if you take a cigarette, the only thing you think about is the next cigarette. It doesn't give you the pleasure. The same with drugs, the same, etc., etc. Some drugs not. Some drugs work on the serotonin. So this dopamine could also be connected to very stupid thoughts. If you think again, Moroccans are aggressive, you get a shot of dopamine. So extreme right parties, we can control them by putting robots in their brain and then changing the addiction in the future. And so you want dopamine, you will get dopamine from thinking that Moroccans are beautiful people. That's a nice task for the future of artificial intelligence. But now about serotonin. Serotonin is a very complex stuff you can make from eggs. Tryptophan it's called. And it's been being made in the intestinal from you. It's like 80% in the body and a small part in the brain. You have like 14 receptors of serotonin and it's spread out in your neocortex. And it has to do with playing piano, doing engineering, doing study, painting, or everything which has to do with long-term, and it has to do with internal activity. So it is not something outside you. You don't need an object for it. Like he writes poem, you don't need a pen and paper, but you can do it in your mind. The essence of serotonin is when you have it, you feel content. Then you know, oh, this is a serotonin experience. You just feel very content. Some people never have experienced this, and I know why. They know why. This is the expert, because you are too much using dopamine. So the tragical stuff is, when you use too much dopamine, the transporter in your neural system are away for the dopamine. So I cannot transport serotonin anymore. So if you want to get happy, put your mobile phone away, put your pornography away, etc., etc. Do a cold turkey, and afterwards maybe the serotonin will come.
Life's gonna be boring.
Huh?
Then life's gonna be boring.
Exactly. Then people say life's gonna be boring, and that's exactly the answer of a dopamine addicted person. Because if you once have experienced boring, which children don't experience anymore, then something will come up. And this is the activation of the neocortex, the activation of fantasy, the activation of imagination. But all the time you go on, I don't want to get bored, you use the dopamine, you fill your system, you will not reach that system of high level, boring, and enlightenment. I'm going to talk with Plato, who will convince you. And if not, you have to read the book 10 times, and then you will say, that's it. But again, I'm fighting against 400 years of ignorance, so it's not an easy task. But how? So here we see why young people. There's a big drama in people who have some kids of 3 already use mobile phones, but it's a big drama. This guy who said I want to commit suicide, it was just a chemical consequence. Because he had dopamine, so he had no serotonin left, and he was completely empty in his brain. That's simple. So we should not talk about suicide. Just put it away, lock yourself in, and he's done it, and it always works. Also in families who are broken or due to social media, throw the whole shit out of it or lock it in, and say, well, from 5 to 6 you can use it, and then talk again. We can solve a lot of problems here in that sort of serotonin orientations. What has that to do with artificial intelligence? Well, artificial intelligence is a sort of reflection of our pig society. It can do everything we did because we did only the repetitive, low dopamine, easy targeting activities, even in our thinking process. When Raymond Kurzweil says, we can copy the thinking process of human beings, easy, the way we think now. Easy to copy. When he says, we can connect this to the iCloud and then it will be a transhuman, perfect. But it will be a complete dopamine, same thoughts addicted creature. So artificial intelligence is a beautiful way of showing to us, you can go this way, but then we can take over, and then you can just go to the beach the whole day. But you don't want to do it because then you say it's boring, so you can even not enjoy yourself. Or the artificial intelligence will show you the way. You have, for the first time in history, do a total rupture of the way we organize, we philosophize, we see ourselves as human beings. And this is a very interesting rupture, because this rupture, you can tell it to somebody and you can tell the experience and he will feel it, so he will do it. So it's not something about an ideology. You bring people to new, closer to themselves experience. Plato already knew this whole drama about the pig society, because he said, we don't understand what we are. And we don't understand what people as a human beings are. He talked about, and a lot of you have heard about Plato, and what is your first sentence when you heard about Plato? What is your connection, association? The cave. It's a very
Ideal
What-
forms.
Theory of ideas.
ideas, and mostly the cave is very important. We are in the cave, so that's what we are now. We are in the cave, but even worse in the cave, we are in the virtual cave. And then he talks about ideas, but what he basically meant by this is you can go into the real thinking process. You can enter real thinking, and believe me, real thinking, said Plato, is an erotical act. Here comes the secret of the eros of symposium. So what do, human beings? We first, like our reptile, our lizard brain is looking for sex. That's our first step. Then you take one, then you take another one, then you take, well, maybe 200 or 20, and you say, well, basically, I know this now. This is the same. Or you go on. But in a symposium, we go to the next level, and we say, maybe we can look for something like a soul contact. So here comes a very old-fashioned concept, which is soul. If you talk with a coder and talk about soul, he will say, I cannot code that. Yes or no? That's it. No, so we don't talk about it. But that's exactly what we can do now. We can say, different than artificial intelligence is the human soul. But then we have to think about the human soul. There's a lot of treasures already hidden in our history of philosophy and art or anthropology, what a human soul is. And there's one book I want to recommend to you all, that's David Bohm on dialogue. And he is basically, you can say, the modern symposium, because he tells us that when you want to think and not having thoughts and not having felt, but real thinking, you go into deep interaction with other human beings. So only our awareness, our collective awareness, that we look together at the same thing, what we're doing now, provokes a sort of emerging soul. So the interesting thing is the question of what is the self, the you put. The answer is the self, the soul, is something that is only possible when different bodies who have potentials for soul making come together, and then the soul emerges. And this looks very weird, but it was normal for 10,000 years. Tribal people sit in a circle, and then they solve problems, just by looking at the problem. What we do is we're sitting in a circle, this time not because it's a dialogue, but a philosophy session. But normally people go in a circle, and they start debating, discussing. And discussing means, in Latin, hitting somebody on the head, making you more in your stand alone. And when you heard somebody say something, your tiger system going to be alert. So you're going to want to kill him, you fight. So the whole thinking process is locked out. So all we do continuously in this dense country is doing debate, killing our possibility of exchanging collective awareness and making erotical realities. Because what is erotical reality? In the definition of Plato, it means that your soul is growing, literally. The soul is very small, and due to all this stupid media bombardment, it's getting smaller and smaller. And it's the same like in the film of what's the name? The women who wanted so much Nymphomania. I don't know if you see that film. Nymphomania. Lust von Trier. It deals with a person who wants so much. It's so addicted to sex. So it's a beautiful example of dopamine super addiction. And at the end, she ends with an old man. Doesn't matter who, as long as she has, of course, her sexual needs. And the old man gives her a secret. He said, the secret of sex is love, which is a Platonic insight. And so you can only have sex when you have love, which is a complete old-fashioned thinking in our culture. Because we say, as much sex is cool. But the point is, like sugar, like salt, if you do just sex, it's a sort of dopamine remembrance of once having real love and sex. Well, you can have also sex with ideas, and this is what Plato said, when your soul is growing and you're making new poems of thought. Probably some of you have experienced this, that you felt such a great gratification in your soul. This is where we should go for. And this is not what we learn at school.
What was the last phrase, sorry?
So we should go for this practice. How can we learn that we can grow our soul? But the soul is not a brain or something spiritual. The soul is, I would say that in modern language, embodied mind. So your embodied mind is the combination of your cells, your muscles, your brain cells, your stomach, the whole system can grow in this soul level. And how can we use artificial intelligence with this? Well, very simple. We can put nanorobots in us, and they will say, "You're again in the dopamine mode. Your tiger is again, because you're talking now in the Parliament of Rotterdam, and again your tiger is out. So you should now stop thinking." So we can see the artificial intelligence will be a horror story maybe for a certain time, but at the end of the day, it's a beautiful guide to say, stop this 300 years enslavement and let the robots do that job. Because robots means, like I told you, compulsory labor. In Plato's time, nobody was afraid of having no work. But why not? Why was nobody afraid of having no work?
Because you're all rich.
No.
It's not such a big population.
No, but yes, that was that. They had a lot of slaves. That was the point.
Yeah.
They had a lot of slaves. So they had robots. It's literally robots. And what did they do the whole day? Because that's now the problem of all our gurus from what shall we do? What all these people, what do they have to do? Because they used to be obesitas, they used to be drug addicted, and what shall we do now? The point is, we can get people into the modus of interactive in identities. So it's completely reverse what Wim Kok said. I don't want to moralize. The future is to moral tribes. So you enter a moral tribe, and then you participate into a creative, constructive moment. And then you say, wow, that was nice. It was not boring. And then you go home and you say, well, tomorrow I go back to the moral tribe and practice this connection between your embodied mind. But in order to believe this story, you have to get rid of very addictive thoughts like, we have a brain, it's all rational, my feeling is romantic, etc., etc., etc. So you should go and try this experience. And I see this as you could say, the Renaissance program for the human rights movement for Europe, I think Europe is the only place in the world where you can realize this project. Why? Look at China, what it's doing. China is even going worse in artificial intelligence because they go on with the enslavement, but now the robots in the human. So that is a lost case. Look at United States. Well, the dopamine is so widespread, even in the way that people think. We don't get an enlightenment there. In Europe, we have several sources where we can still connect the revival of a different sort of model of human beings, and that implies you are not your ego in your skeleton. You are basically somebody in relation with. So you build up bridges, and the bridges is somebody. That's your identity. And if you make a strong bridge with more people, you get a stronger identity. So you don't debate anymore, because what's the fun of debating? You kill the bridge. Then you don't get the serotonin. So to have this strong experience, basically already spoken by Joseph Beuys, the artist, have this intensively but high-level consciousness experience, which is not rational, but it's your body. And there's, at this moment, a very interesting research going on that even abstract thinking, like what we do in philosophy, the structure of power is related to the discipline and normalization, that sort of sentences. Even abstract thinking is related to our body. We have learned abstract concepts from body movements, amazing as it sounds. So that's a beautiful, you can say a beautiful point for our distinctions from robots. Because robots don't have bodies, whatever you will try. They don't have awareness, collective attention, and they don't have this two-level awareness of consciousness in us. So let's join the party with them and say, come in, do everything we did till now, copy us, and then we can become Plato again, and which means erotical creatures, and not in the pornographic sense, but in the artistic, aesthetical sense. And that means a daily life without dopamine, a daily life with erotical growing of the soul. So that's what I propose for Rotterdam. Yes.